Hello, everybody. We're back for another episode of DeSimone Deals, the Exit Strategy Podcast. This podcast has been built and is produced to help business owners prepare their business for sale and to help them avoid some common mistakes that other business owners have made in the past so that you can maximize the result of your exit and maximize the value of your business. As always, I bring different guests and their perspective. This is about learning from all the experts that you have to work with during this process. This month, I'm bringing in a special guest, a good friend of mine. I wish he was a better golfer. I might play with him a little bit more. But Jeff Muir, who I actually worked with for 7 years, he actually was very instrumental in helping me learn a lot about the M&A process and helped me become better at this process as well. We both left that firm that we worked together for a while. We've gone in different directions for different reasons, but we're friendly competitors, and probably more often than not, we're friendly collaborators because we help each other on different deals more than we compete with each other. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Jeff Muir from Sinclair Advisors.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. I guess just a little bit of background. As Greg said, I've been on the M&A side for a little under 15 years. Made a move out on my own after 20 plus years in commercial banking, dealing with family-owned businesses, closely held businesses, doing a lot of lending, doing a lot of real estate and different sort of work with them. Decided that banking had gotten a bit restrictive, wanted to do something still in that marketplace, but saw obviously an opportunity as demographics evolved to help on the valuation, sell, and merger and acquisition side. So has been an interesting ride. It is a unique marketplace. It's something that business owners who are very, very well-versed in their industry are not always well-versed in the ins and outs of merger and acquisition. We find business owners that compare the process to buying a house, to buying a building, to doing some other things, and it just doesn't have a whole lot of matchup there. So that's what got me interested in it. It's exciting, both good and bad, and no two deals are exactly the same. So it makes it fun.
So one of the things that I liked when we worked together is we both had financial backgrounds, but we had different paths and we have different skill sets with our financial backgrounds. So you were a commercial banker for 20 years. What are some of the skills that you learned as a banker that helped you in this M&A process and then helped you guide, more importantly, guide business owners through this process?
I guess I'd say the first thing that you have to understand when you're in the advisory role is to realize that the finance and the accounting that you learned however long ago is different when you're dealing with a closely held business. And I'll call it small business, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but these are businesses that will not and never will end up being SEC regulated. So their financials and the way they do accounting, while perfectly legitimate, is completely different than the way accounting and finance is taught in business school. And so realizing the unique things that they do, being able to ask those questions about compensation and the relationship in affiliated real estate and all the, we'll call them quirky little things and ways that owners take funds from the business. And again, I don't mean that in a negative way, is understanding that is really something that you need to do to be a good lender. And I found it was even more important when you came over on the M&A side to make sure that you were able to present them in a way that maximized what their earnings looked like.
You used a phrase, which was code word, I think, taking funds from the business. I've heard that some people call that aggressive tax strategies. How does taking funds from the business and aggressive tax strategies, how does that impact a business's ability to market themselves and maximize their value?
I think it's a question of, and I had this conversation earlier today. This is not an IRS audit. The buyer in the business is looking to understand what they get in a very simple format. And so the other word that's used is discretionary. And how you spend the money in the business that you're the 100% shareholder of is completely up to you. All the buyer of that business wants to understand is, where did it go? Because I'm going to make different decisions. And if you chose to pay your family members, or you chose to, put a sales office in Florida that you use in February, that's up to you. I don't care as a buyer, but I just want to understand where all that comes from. And being able to clearly explain it and demonstrate it within your financials is really all the buyer's looking for.
So I think you and I have talked about this in the past, and we've talked with, I know one specific prospect. They still haven't decided to sell yet, but they were paying their family really high salaries. We like to eat their food occasionally. This is the company I'm talking about. And they also had a lot of perks, whether it was cars or groceries, because that could have been funneled through their produce purchases and stuff like that. How do you look at when you talk to a business owner saying, okay, you want to sell this business, but you have 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, depending on how many family members you have, that are making 2 times the market rate for a job that you could hire a person that without the last same name at half the rate and probably at the same productivity. How do you deal with that situation? How does that impact a sales process?
So it's a two-prong issue. One of them is the financial, which is relatively straightforward, and I'll talk about in a second. And the other is the family issue, and we'll call it the emotional issue. On the financial side, you do research and you look and say, what does somebody comparable who's not a family member make? What's the market rate for that person in this job? If we laid off, or the son, daughter-in-law, whatever it is, decides to leave, what are we paying the next person in the door? And then we just make an adjustment to that salary. That is, you got to do some research, but it's relatively simple. Dealing with it on the family side and having them go back and say, by the way, if you're staying, you're going to stay at a lower salary because the buyer's not going to pay that. Or you can stay at your salary, but we're going to make less on the sale. That tends to be, I talk about dealing with family business, and I like the business part of family business. That's the family side. Mm-hmm. And we put it in front of them and they have to deal with the issue.
So what Jeff was saying there is if say a person's getting paid $200,000, they should only make $100,000. So they're getting paid $100,000 of excess capital or excess salary, excuse me. If their company is being valued, say at 5 times earnings, but you're reducing your earnings by an extra $100,000 because that's salary, and your family members want to keep this salary, well, that $100,000 gets taken. You don't get the sale price at the max value and the max salary. You're going to lose that $100,000 excess compensation times 5 times in this scenario. That's a $500,000 loss in value. So those are the decisions family members have to make, and when they go into the sales process, and that's one of the, I think, Jeff, you and I have had these conversations. It's probably one of the harder discussions to have, is figuring out what they're really going to get and how their lifestyle is going to change after the transaction.
Yep. And that really is something that should be discussed before you even go to market, so that everybody's on the same page. Because again, the question is, if a family member is the head of sales, there's a better than excellent possibility that they're going to want that person to stay. If they're the head of finance, everybody brings in their own money people. That's not as big a deal. But yeah, having that conversation ahead of time and making sure that we're all on the same page is pretty important.
So you've been doing this, like you said, for a long time. You were a banker for 20 years. You were an M&A advisor for 15 plus, because you're still going. With all that experience, knowing what you now know, what are some of the top three things that you would recommend business owners take care of before they go through the exit process?
The buyer is buying essentially 2 things. They're buying your employees, and they're buying your products/services, and depending upon what business you might be in. Developing your employees is, to me, the number one thing that you can do, and number one thing you probably should be doing anyway. And you've heard me use this, but I'll use it here. The old movie Wall Street always talked about, we're going to wreck this company because it's wreckable, which it made for a nice scene, but it's not what the buyers of closely held businesses are looking to do. If it's a turnaround, fine, but let's talk about the successful business that's doing well, that has a good team, that has good products and good customers. I would rather buy a team of employees if I'm a buyer than almost anything else. I mean, we all know how difficult it is to get the right employees in the current environment. And if you have them and they're developed, and by developed, it's they have responsibility. Everything doesn't report back to the owners of the company. They have some autonomy. You have a structure to the org chart. That's invaluable to the buyer that's coming in, because what it says is the owner or owners of this company can leave, and there's not a ton of disruption. I can plug somebody in at CEO, at president, or whatever, and just have them report to somebody different, as opposed to every decision that gets made flows through the owner. That's a problem. So developing the employees, absolutely number one. Two, and I'll call it products and services, but making sure that the way you look at your sales and your expenses is a way that somebody can walk in and see it. So what am I, and the typical questions will be, who are your top clients? But then digging down into, well, what are the margins on those? What type of products do they buy? How many of those products did they buy? How much did the price of that product change? And again, substitute service in for product. I'll just use product for the time being. But a buyer wants to dig into that at a very granular level. And what we find is a lot of very well-run businesses just don't think that way. And some of it's because they've done it for so long and it's in the brains of the top people, and we don't need to look at that. I would argue that you do, even if you're keeping the business. But digging into those issues and understanding where that volume came from, what the trends are, is it seasonal? Why did this go up? Why did this go down? And sometimes there are perfectly logical reasons for it, but it can slow the process down greatly if the answers to those kind of questions are not right at your fingertips. And I think the businesses that we've dealt with who have had the smoothest transactions are the ones that could answer those questions and frankly had really good data. And I think the third thing, and this goes a little bit back to our initial conversation about ownership and family and things like that, make sure that everybody's on the same page. If you've got multiple shareholders, whether they're 50-50, 25 apiece, however that structure is, make sure everybody understands, even if you're the one making the decision and you own more than 51%, I can decide to do what I want. Yes, but it scares buyers when ownership is not all on the same page. And it doesn't have to go to litigation, but it can sure drag things down. If you've got family members that are in the business, again, it's interesting to me, the family dynamics where they don't want to share that information. We work together every single day. We're all part of the family, but it's not time to tell the other members of the family that this is what I want to do. It's your business. You can do what you want with it, but it, again, slows it down. And I'll use my, child that's the head of sales who finds out part of the way through the transaction, this is what's going on, and now has to make their own decisions about, well, am I staying? Am I going? What's happening with, where does this come from? And it slows down the process. So I'll call it getting your ducks in a row, but have those conversations. They're not easy, but it will pay off as we get into what can be an arduous part of the process when we get from, yes, we love this offer, to we get a check.
Those are, I see that all the time. And obviously I think those are really, really important. And some of them are hard to fix. Some are easy to fix. I want to dig into a couple of those a little bit deeper. I'm not going to go too much into employees and building your team, because almost every guest I'm going to bring on here is going to tell you the same thing. You got to build the infrastructure. You got to have your team in place. Have everyone have teams with accountability and responsibility so that you're not the choke point as the owner. But you were talking about the product and services, and you went a slightly different direction. But once you went there, I knew exactly why it was important. You and I have dealt with a lot of businesses where they make lots of money, and because they're making lots of money, they don't really try to get under the covers and micromanage or figure out where the subtleties and where they make money, where could they make a little bit more, where they're making a little bit less, and how to tweak their analysis, while a buyer probably will do that. I think from what I've seen in the clients that said the smoother, the ones that had that data versus just managing based on how much cash they were taking in, they had some kind of management dashboard or forecasting or KPIs, and a lot of them had either a CFO or an outsourced CFO. How important do you think it is to have a CFO or some kind of forecasting and KPI type management process?
Depending upon the size of the business. And again, everybody cannot afford a full-time, really talented CFO. If you can, absolutely get one. Even if it's boy, this is really a drag on profitability for 2 or 3 years, but it's going to pay off in the end when you go to sell the business. Because again, we talked about making adjustments. The buyer's going to make adjustments as well. They're going to look at it and go, okay, I've got an head of accounting or a head of finance. I don't really have a CFO. Okay, the size of this business at the moment, it needs a CFO. So you may be paying, 75 or 100,000, and they're going to round up to 150, 175, maybe even 200 for that position. And when they are doing their analysis, they're going to assume that. So what looks like a drag on earnings for you really is something they're going to adjust for anyway. You bring up a really interesting point, and a position that you and I've had some great success with buyers is the fractional CFO, the 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, however you figure it out. And they can supplement your accounting team and provide that, the forecasting, provide the analysis, ask some of those questions, because it's difficult for an owner. And I'm sure there are people watching this going, well, that sounds great, except I need 5 more hours a week that I don't have, pardon me, that I don't have to try to do all the analysis you're talking about. Well, that fractional CFO can come in there, ask the questions, gather the data, work with the folks you've got, and start looking not only backwards, but to your point about forecasting, looking forwards and going, okay, how are we going to grow? And what data do we have that can show us who is it we want to target? How do we want to grow? Are we cross-selling existing clients? What are we doing for margins? And they can ask some of those questions. And you and I found that they pay for themselves in the sale process when you get into again, that granular detail.
One of the things I've seen with outsourced CFOs and anyone who has control of the data is when we put a book together, we kind of have to normalize earnings, and we have to show what adjustments might be. How important is it, or how advantageous is it for a seller to be able to identify what those adjustments are? So when we go to market, we're presenting what the adjustments are and the justifications versus waiting for a buyer to find them during the diligence process.
So, I'll use it. I was thinking of this as we were talking earlier. Realize that the buyers, and in a lot of cases, you and I deal quite a bit with sophisticated buyers, the private equity folks, or corporate buyers that are quite familiar with the process. They have their own way of doing this. They're going to do their own math. What they're not going to do is explain to you where your add backs are. And if you don't bring them up, and if you don't make a case for them, it's not their responsibility to turn around and do that. And again, using an athletic model, if you don't know what the rules of the game are, it's not my responsibility to tell you how many yards there are on a first down or whether you're allowed to steal second base or not. If you don't know that, I'm a gentleman, but it's not my responsibility to explain to you how I should have to pay you more money. So yes, making your own case and understanding where those add backs are. And again, that's a big part of what an advisor can do for you, because you'll look at certain things and say, I don't have to do that. That's discretionary. Okay. We may agree, we may disagree. And there'll be other places where we look and go, well, why do you do that? Well, we did this because of that and the other. Okay. And it could be an extraordinary expense. You tried something, you spent a bunch of money on it, and it affected earnings a year or two ago. You abandon the effort. Okay, well, we should add that back and explain, hey, we thought we could go into a new market, didn't work out for various reasons. It's really, it was a one-time thing. We think we ought to add it back.
Yeah, I think one of the examples I've heard you say in the past in this one is the sports tickets or the club tickets, where someone says, oh, those are personal, those are add back, that we don't need to have the club tickets. Then you ask the owner, what are you using those club tickets for? How often do you use them? Like, well, all my best clients, I take them to all the best games. And I remember you asking the guy, I was sitting in this meeting, I was new to that last firm, and said, well, do they expect to go to a game every year? Yeah, they're kind of expecting that because we do it every year. Well, is that really a personal expense now, or is it really a marketing and business development expense that your top clients expect to get? And if you stop doing it, do they think of the company differently? And if you go away and the tickets go away, do they still do they still want to buy from this company? So those are the type of discretionary things I think you're talking about, correct?
Correct. And it's interesting that, like so many words, discretionary has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. And if I'm running a business and we're struggling, do I need to keep the tickets? I don't. We can still generate revenue if I don't have the tickets. And that was the discussion we were having with him. And he's like, well, I don't have to have them. I can still function. And I always sort of laugh about, we don't need to leave the lights on all the time. I mean, the guys that worked the last hour in December, we could turn the lights off. They could probably figure out how to work in the dark. So we could cut, 25% of the power budget. And that's a silly example, but that's sometimes what discretionary becomes. And this discretionary is not, what are we doing bare bones to keep, to keep functioning? It's, well, where do we do this that is to the benefit of the owner and the owner only? Or in my extraordinary expense idea of, a lot of people, they hired a consultant, or they brought in somebody for a small period of time, or they did something, post-COVID that was an extraordinary expense because they needed to do it. And once they got to 22 and beyond, they didn't need to do it anymore. So those are also discretionary. But yeah, this is one where it's in the eye of the beholder. And if you set forth the argument, you won't win every argument. And you'll have discussions with buyers, and buyers will go, oh, yeah, okay, tell me more about that one. And you may or may not get it. The odd thing, just to interject it here, is it's for people that dive into numbers and business owners that love to understand the battle. You never really know what the math they did. Very, very seldom. Every once in a while, in a post transaction, you and I we'll dig through with them and go, hey, what did you do with this? What did you do with that? Just so we can learn from it. But you never really know what they add back and what they accepted and what they didn't. All you know is what the last number, which is the purchase price and the structure of the purchase, how they got to that. And a lot of times we caution owners and go, if we got to the number we wanted, I don't care how they did the math. And that's fine. But you don't always know which arguments you win, which ones you don't. You just have to make reasonable arguments.
I also want to touch on you and your top three things that people should take advantage of or take care of before they go to sell. You talked about, I'm gonna talk about this communication and having a plan, because it could be whether it's a management, you're anticipating a management buyout, or you're anticipating your kids taking over. How important is that? Like, and how do you recommend people going through that? Because I've seen this where, or I know you have a couple of stories where management team thinks they want to buy it, but they don't know how they're going to do it. Or parents want the kids to take over, but the kids don't know that that's the plan. They think it might be the plan, but they have no idea what the timing is. How do you see those things playing out?
And I guess I'll handle them in separately because they have different issues. So
yep.
Let's work with the management purchase first. I'll call it a romantic notion, and it can work. But I think the owner needs to look at it and be honest with themselves. And one of the questions we always ask is, what are you paying the people that you're thinking are going to buy your company? Let's use a round number of $5 million. Do they have the financial wherewithal to do that? And again, having been on the banker side, and you get approached with those deals and you go, hey, I love the intangible part of it. I've got a management team staying together. They've been there a long time. I've got product. I've got sales. I've got finance. This is super. The only thing I lack is any actual ability to pay, because they don't make enough money. They don't really have any, anything beyond a house and, a car and things like that. Do they have the ability to do this? And a lot of times the answer is no. And you can work on this structure ahead of time for years, but now the risk is staying on the business owner. So if you really want to do that, you need to look at it in a cold, hard financial way rather than again, I'll go back to romantic of, wouldn't it be great if we sold the company? They've been so loyal to us. They're such great people. And that's terrific, except you really would like a check. And sometimes those two things don't work well together. So take all of that same discussion and now add the wonderful layer of they're related to you. And the example that we've used for years is, okay, we've all decided we're going to sell it to the kids. We'll go with 3 kids. That's super. We put the deal together. for the most part, mom and dad have taken back paper because the bank didn't really want to finance the $5 million. So mom and dad financed the $5 million, and things are a little slow in the month of October. What does Thanksgiving dinner look like? It's not fun. And in a lot of cases, and we use the example, and we've had some great success with husband and wife owners, the wife will look and go, I don't think this is the right way to go, because she's already anticipating some of those issues and saying, look, I'd love to do that, but we've got a wonderful family dynamic. Do we really want to mess with it by having a situation where they owe us money? And by the way, we need the money. We've totally reversed now from when you were little and you needed my money. I now need you to make a loan payment every month so I can eat. That's a really hard situation. And again, it's doable, but you need to have that conversation, to me, 5 or plus years, I almost say 10, if you're going to do it correctly and figure out how is it that we're going to enable and empower, whether it's the management team or that also happens to be the siblings, the relatives, and make this work. It's not I want to be out of here in 2 years and we're going to present it to the men, because I find those hard to do.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And one of the things I think you and I both have seen is that it's a great romantic idea, and it does work sometimes if you do the right type of planning. But I don't know if you would agree, but I've seen is when you do it, sell it to a management team, or you sell it to the employees, to your family members, because you didn't do enough financial planning beforehand to actually just gift it to them, that you typically have to take less money than you would if you sold it to a third party. And you may still have to retain more risk by, like you said, carrying paper, by creating your own personal loan to the parties. Do you agree with that? Or how do you see that playing out and making that kind of a decision?
The ideal way to do those is to get the shareholder out of it. I'm not a huge fan of shareholders taking back significant amounts of paper. I personally prefer anything that's 80% cash, and by cash, it could be somebody else's debt. It could be the debt of the bank. It could be whoever else that's not you. To me, a good transaction has at least 80% of cash to the seller of the business. Mm-hmm. There are ways to do that. Again, if we've worked with we've been strategic with the business and looked at it and talked to our bankers and said, hey, how can we structure this so that 5-10 years from now, the 3 kids can buy this, and what do we need to do for collateral, and what does cash flow need to look like, and how do we need to do all these things, and try to figure out a way to make that work. And in the bank's case, they love that because I've got some continuity, and putting my banker hat on for 5 seconds, they love the continuity of the management. They love the continuity of the family, but the financials have to work. So yeah, I'm really not a fan of taking back paper. All that, to me, you still have all the risk, and now you don't have any of the control that you had before.
That's where I was kind of going with it. I know that you've had in a similar vein, closely held business, and you have multiple partners, but they have different end goals, and their end goals may have different timelines. How have you seen this play out, and what are some ways you can help prevent that or mitigate some of those risks?
So we were in a couple of them. One of them worked, one of them didn't. There were 4 shareholders in each case. One of them had a majority. The one that worked had a majority shareholder. So they had somebody that could make the decision and say, hey, this is what we're doing. In that case, one of them had already retired, and they had a really sort of not well thought out retirement plan for him that had a couple of pieces of paper rather than contracts and proper legal documents and things like that, and basically said, hey, we owe you this, and when we get it, we'll pay it to you. A second partner that had set a deadline of, hey, this is when I want to be out of here. And the other 2 that sort of wanted out, but one of them was significantly younger than the other 3, and he was the majority owner, but sort of got left holding the bag. Again, and that was kind of my inspiration for, get your house in order. First of all, I'm a huge fan of having agreements as to how you're getting out, and not to be doom and gloom, but bad things happen. And if you've got 4 shareholders and something happens to one of them, the family of that person is going to come and go, hey, he's a 20, 30, whatever percent owner of this business. We'd really like our money now. And the other 3 go, well, that really wasn't how we thought it was going to work. Well, what did we write down? What was our plan? What was the discussion ahead of time? And the one I'm thinking of, we literally lost the guy that had retired because we still needed his consent because he still was a shareholder in it. And the buyers got really spooked when we couldn't find him. He would not respond for the better part of 2 or 3 weeks. It eventually worked out, and we did some, we'll give you this. And by we, I mean the other owners said, well, if we did this for you, if we did that for you, would that work? Would that be okay? But there was no hard plan. And so it made it really difficult. It's much better if you've thought through the contingencies and said, okay, if we decide to sell, particularly if you're the one in control, because while you have control, all our good lawyer friends will tell you, it's only as good as when one of them comes back and says, no, you violated my rights as a shareholder, at which point the buyers just run because they're like, you know what, I don't need this. You guys work out your problems. And if you figure that out, I'll come back. Buyers don't want to deal with your headaches among your shareholders.
So I think you and I would agree then on this, that while a lot of people ridicule attorneys, I will tell you, this is where attorneys really shine. If you tell them what your plan is, they will help document it. And what they are really good at doing is, okay, when it goes wrong or when different things happen, here's how we're going to handle it. We're going to agree on how we're going to handle certain things that may happen in the future, so we don't have to disrupt the business. We don't have to worry about how to get a malcontent shareholder out, or we don't, if there's a death or disability, how to handle that situation so the business can keep running, and you've already predetermined how it'll be solved. So I think that's one of the biggest things, is when business owners take charge of that and use their attorneys to help lay out all the different contingencies and the resolutions to them in advance.
Absolutely. And it's more problems, and aside from M&A, but more businesses end up in problems when shareholders start disagreeing and shareholders fight, and we've run across them where, well, they don't talk to one another. I'm like, oh, joy. And that just isn't, it's not positive for the business, whether it's selling or not. So, yes, will the lawyers make money? The lawyers will make money, but find people that can find resolution and can work out an agreement. And if you don't want to talk to one another, you don't have to talk to one another, but get yourself a resolution, because you'll never get out from under that business if you can't figure out a way to solve those problems.
Right. So we've gone through a lot of different issues. And we've covered, I think, some of the stuff that I was going to lead into for the next couple of questions, but I'm going to ask you anyways. Is there any particular horror story? We can protect the guilty and innocent here, but any horror stories that we can talk about that we can then use as a lever to give advice on how to prevent that from happening in the future, on future transactions?
So we talked about one of them, which was the multiple shareholder one. The other one that comes to mind, and it was an older business. It was not struggling, but it was not growing. Had been in the family for a long time. The seller was a consummate gentleman, and one of his things was he wanted to make sure that everybody knew everything there was to know about that business, to the point where he would share things that at times when we sort of went, okay, we're going to share that, but not just yet. And a little bit of, the dating analogy of, don't tell them all of your family problems on the first or second date. Yes, it's going to come up at some point, but maybe we just sort of, make sure they really like us for us first before we start telling them about all these horror things, some of which mattered and a lot of which were just sort of anecdotal of how we ended up in this problem, how we ended up in that problem. And so I can remember the conversation, which was, I just want to be honest. And I said, you're not being dishonest by not telling them every single thing you know at the moment that it pops into your head. And so using your advisors and letting them disseminate the information based on their experience. And this deal got done, by the way. I think it cost him some money. but it got done. But you've suddenly started to cast negativity upon this deal. And again, everybody's bought a house. If you get to the house and there's some big hole in the backyard with a tarp over top of it, and they start telling you about 50 years ago, so-and-so was buried in there, and you're going, okay, how do I get out of here? As opposed to, yep, there's a hole back there, and we're going to fill it with sand. We're going to put a nice flower bed on it, and it won't be a problem by the time you buy it. Okay, cool. I don't need to know how we got there. I just want to know that the hole got filled in and there's a nice bunch of flowers. Keep things positive and let your advisors disseminate the information. Mm-hmm. Let me look at that one. So I wrote a note down because I assumed you were going to ask me about the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
We had another one. It was similar. He was a communicator, but if you asked him how he was, he told you. And so again, trying to be upbeat, present the business in the best possible light, looking forward and not backward. And so he was a very frugal gentleman, to the point where as you talk to his employees, he kept the soap for the bathroom in his desk drawer because he was fearful that they would spend too much money, because we didn't want to waste the soap. Now, this business did $15 million, so they could afford some soap. But that was how he ran the business. That's fine, except that if that gets back to the buyers of it, they're going, okay, this is weird. This is not the thing that we're looking for something a little more professional than this. And so we had to do a fair amount of coaching to say, look, focus on the positives. Don't tell them why, so-and-so doesn't come in on Friday. This one doesn't. Okay, but deal with those issues. Don't overshare. And maybe it's a similar story, but in the end, we did a lot of coaching up of this particular seller and got him, because it was a wonderful business. It had a lot going for it. If you walked in it was a little musty, but it made a lot of money, which is really what the buyers wanted. And so it was a presentation issue, and it was a little bit of, let's clean it up. Again, I keep saying it's not like buying a house, but it kind of is. Put the stuff away, put the toys in the box, mop the floor, make the thing look nice. And he wanted to talk about his problems that day rather than talking about his positives that day.
And I want to clarify, because I've worked with Jeff, and there's no way that he or I are ever a proponent of lying or hiding. It's everything that needs to come out will come out, but you want to control the message and the timing of it. He used the examples for dating. Like, you don't lead with your flaws on your first date, but when you're walking to the altar, you pretty much know your spouse or your spouse to be knows everything that's good, bad, and ugly, and they've already made a decision. They love you, and they are willing to deal with the flaws. But if you lead with the flaws, you may never get to the point where they learn to love you. So it's all about managing the timing. You're not going to hide anything, but you manage the message. And I think what you and I have done this a lot in the process is, and sometimes buyers get mad at this because they want all the information as quick as possible. And we don't want to waste our owner's time. So I think you and I learned a lot of this from you, is we're going to give you enough information up front so the buyer can make an informed decision of how much do they love this business. When I say how much do they love it, how much are they willing to pay roughly? And if they pass that test, we then go to the next level of dating or the process. It's like, we're going to give you a lot more information so that you can dig into this. It's not diligence, it's pre-diligence, or some other term, where you get to learn more and more about the business. You get to learn some of the flaws, see some of the warts, get an explanation of how it fits in and how it happens and how they deal with it and how it will be managed. So that when they make an offer, they have to stand by that offer, because they can never come back during diligence where they're going through everything and say, well, you know what, now that I know this, I thought your business was worth 10 million. It's only worth 8. We want to be able to say, we want to help you be able to say to the buyer, no. We told you that. It's right here. You made your offer based on that information. And that's how you want to manage the process. So the only time they can actually change an offer realistically is because your business is doing much worse. So operationally, something changed, or operationally something changed to the better, and you're actually worth more because your business is worth more. Like, maybe you got a 5-year contract that wasn't there when you started. So that's the whole process of managing the message. It's not to hide them and say, okay, we want you to buy this and not know everything. We just want to make sure the information comes out at the point in time where they're in love with you and they'll start to overlook those minor flaws versus leading with those minor flaws.
And it's interesting, and I guess I'll emphasize the minor part of the flaw. And we've been in situations where, and we've got a concentration issue. 80% of the revenue comes from one client. It's in the book, and it's in the book immediately, because if you can't deal with that, you're not the right buyer for me. We've had issues where the head of sales retired. Okay, the head of sales retired. If you think we can come in and develop a sales organization, or our salespeople are all close to retirement age, I'm going to put that in there, because if you can't deal with that issue, you're not the right buyer for us. So you're absolutely right. It's not, you can't hide anything. Trust me when you go through this process. I've heard due diligence. One of our clients once referred to it as a paperwork proctology exam. So that is what you're going to go through. So there is nothing to hide. But yes, it's a question of when do I share the information and how do I share it? And at the early stages, when you want multiple people interested in bidding on it, you don't want to scare them off. And these buyers are looking at, tens, if not hundreds of deals, and they've got a process and they're trying to move through it. And if they see something early that scares them, even if it's not really that important, it's just one way to get you out of the pile. And so presenting all of those positives at the beginning, and then working our way toward, oh, by the way, here's something you should know about, once you've found some things you like, is exactly what we're talking about. But no, you're not hiding anything, believe me.
So we talked a lot about things that could go wrong and kind of almost scaring people, which I'd like to focus on the positive as well. You and I have had lots of successes. Why don't you share a success story or two of people who've done it well and it's worked, from how they built their business and it really translated all the way through the sale process?
So what's really fun about this, about doing what we do, is that you run across people who have a wonderful idea. They develop it, they grow it, they put together a team of people, and they reach a stage of their lives where they go, you know what, it's time for me to move on. Now, it could be age, it could be just size of company, where they go, you know what, I grew this to a certain size, and everything beyond here is really not A, what I'm capable of, and B, what I enjoy doing. And we've had folks over the years that sold and then started something else and then sold that. One in particular was a really, really interesting company that you and I worked on together. And he was somewhat pigeonholed, and the company was successful pre-COVID. During COVID, he discovered a need among his client base that, really out of desperation, because he was struggling to try to generate revenue because his typical service wasn't as needed, he went to his clients and said, I've got a bunch of wonderful people. What can I do for you? And they came back and said, what we could really use, and he was on the security side, we could really use this type of protection, this type of security. And he remade the business, and it was wildly successful. And it was a completely different business, to the point where, you and I reached out to buyers who looked at him only one way. And we said, look, if you're going to look at him as a traditional security company, you're wrong. If you want to look at it this way and think about the growth possibilities of this, then please look at it that way and please bid on it. And we exceeded his and our wildest expectations. But another part of that goes back to he had a fractional CFO. And as he was looking at the growth model and looking at what the possibilities were, this gentleman was working with him behind the scenes going, okay, here's what the projection looks like. Here's what this, if they do X amount of hours. And so when the question became, well, how big can this get? We had data for it. And so that was a really good situation where even 5 years, 3 years before he sold it, it probably was worth half. But the business evolved. He was smart enough to evolve with it. He had some super people around him who evolved with it. And he was able to extract himself prior to you and I even getting there. And so it made it a very attractive and interesting company to try to sell.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite clients to work on. One is, he was very knowledgeable. He knew more about security than we will ever know and still know. But when it came to the M&A process, he was like Clay. He says, just tell me what I need to do. And he followed every instruction, and he became a natural where he just went into every meeting, knew what information to bring up front, what to highlight, what to kind of foreshadow is going to be coming down the road as we get to that. He was great. The other two things that I remember with him is that, like you said, he kind of steps up. He knew that he needed to make himself redundant if he wanted to leave that business, and he hired a great business development person and a COO, so that he was strategic. He was not operational. He was not part and parcel to making sure the product and services got done. And the other thing to highlight what you said with his customers, a lot of people say they want to be an entrepreneur and they think they got to build the next great software app. He just went to his customer and said, I have this resource. I'm not using it. What things do you need that I could help you with? He listened to the customer and said, well, if you need that and I have this, I'm going to create a service. I make this service. Will you buy it? And they said, absolutely. And not only did they buy it, they tripled the size of the business. And to me, that's what an entrepreneur is. It's not creating the next new thing. It's like listening to your customers and filling their need. It doesn't have to be figuring something brand new. It's just, okay, I have these resources. How can I use them differently? And it was a great story to tell.
Well, what was interesting on him as well was that his competitors couldn't figure out how to do it because they were so locked into the way that they did it, that when the customers had this obvious need, and it, as you say, it was not rocket science by any stretch. But once you looked at it and you thought about it, you went, yeah, I can see why they would do that. And he was able to use some software, create a model that enabled him to use the resources and the people that he had in an efficient way for both him and the customers. And it just changed the dynamic. One other one that I'm thinking about, because it dovetails a little bit back, we talked about some of the challenges of family folks. We had another business, goes back several years. Interesting. Was a distributor with an engineering capability. So it was, we'll call it a value add distributor. Family business, husband and wife. If you can tell, I love stories. One of them was, so she was the CFO and the company was 15, 16 million, something like that by the time it got to the stage where it was time to sell it. And she was awesome. But looked at us one day when there was a team of accountants that had been flown in from New York to analyze all this and said, how did I end up being the CFO of this company? I'm trained as a medical technician. And as family businesses tend to be, I looked at her and said, because you're the only one he trusts with his checkbook. And she goes, darn it, that's exactly what he says all the time. And the truth of the matter is the company was going to be sold because he didn't want to have to hire somebody else to look after his checkbook. Now that seems really elementary, but it was the right age, it was the right time, and she did an awesome job. And he went, I don't want to replace her and I don't want her to retire. And she's like, I'm not doing this anymore. It's just too damn big. And so that was the dynamic that motivated the sale. They also had two of their kids working in the business.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up.
They were not in the top 10 highly compensated employees in the business. And when we ran through that, I remember saying to him, like, wow, this is unique. He goes, I'm paying. Then they were young. They were, mid-20s. Somebody goes, I'm paying them what they're worth. And they were engineers and they had capability. And he goes, yeah, but if somebody else hired them, that's the level at which they'd be hired. He goes, I don't want to hire them at a higher dollar level because, it's going to skew my business. It's going to skew the earnings. I don't want to do that. If they want to stay, great. If they don't, fine. So that business, because of the way they built it and because of the expertise that it had, but also the thoughtfulness of what the family did, it was run like a business. And it was, they're wonderful people. We're still in touch with them. And it was a great family dynamic, but the business and the family dynamic didn't weave themselves so much that it caused issues. And that ended up being a really interesting deal. We sold it to a private equity group in the Midwest. He made the money up front. He made the earnings from there. And actually, he helped them find the next set of companies that they wanted to buy. So it was a wonderful transaction to be part of. But that was one where not only did the business develop itself thoughtfully over several years, they didn't let the family dynamic get in the way. They had those conversations. Everybody knew where we were going. Everybody knew what the exit strategy was, and everybody worked toward it.
I wasn't involved in that deal, but I remember hearing, we would talk about this in our meetings, our update meetings. And what I remember from that from the side is they had a conversation about should the kids take over, and they put a plan in place, and they said, you know what, I don't know if that's the right move. I think we could do better for us and the family by selling it. And the other part I really like, and I use this phrase, when you have family members, it's really advantageous to, I'm not saying you should never give your family the family benefit, but when you do your straight payroll, I am a big proponent of having your compensated based on what your operational role is worth in the marketplace. Then if you want to give bonuses and distributions and give the family benefit, do it that way, because it's really easy to show what your business is worth. It's really show what the true profitability is, and your family members still get the benefit without mucking up your P&L. Not that we can't probably massage it and get it normalized, but it's so much easier when it's very discretionary. Like, if this bucket of money is not necessary, this is what the role is worth.
Yep,
Now,
totally
those
agree.
are two things I saw from the side, and I'm like, wow, that's a really. I was jealous because I think I was working through a more difficult situation. Like, God, those two owners just get it,
Yep.
and they did a lot of things right. So it's a pleasure, it's a joy. I mean, we'll help anybody, but it's really fun when they get it and they've done the right things all along.
And all of the examples of the situation where, and you mentioned earlier, where they'll take advice. And as I say to people, I don't need you to agree with me all the time. And one of the challenges of working with small business owners, which I've loved for how many, way too many years that I've done it, is that they are intense and they are in control, and they do like to know that their opinion is respected, and we do that. But you also need somebody that's coachable. And again, having so many examples as football season starts of, you just need people that are coachable. I don't need you to agree with me all the time, but just be willing to listen, be open to ideas, and let's collaborate together and go, okay, here's the best approach to this. And using the things that you've done really well as a strength, and show that in the business. And in other cases, they'll look and go, I don't want to do it though. Okay, fine. And people will say, I want to make sure they keep all my people here. Great, we can do that. There might be a discount involved in it because somebody may bid higher and say, I want to move it to Arizona. Okay, but we can do that. You can chart the course. And I think sometimes owners get afraid of this process because they think they're going to lose control of it. You don't lose control of it. You're looking for advice. You're looking for guidance. And all you need to do is listen and ask questions. You're not going to agree with everything, and that's okay. We're not running the process. It's your company. You make the decisions, but open your mind up to things that may be a little uncomfortable, that you don't necessarily understand, but let's talk through them, whether it's us or somebody else, and avail yourself of the advice, because it's a really arduous process that can turn out great. It'll change your life if done correctly. The dollars involved are wonderful. You have freedom to do. The people we've talked about are free to do anything they want now. They are released from financial concern, and they're doing some things that are leisurely and some things that are business oriented, but they're doing them because they enjoy them, not because they have to.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, this has been great. I always enjoy talking M&A and business with you, because both you and I think are alike, that we're generally curious about why people are successful and why some aren't, and just love talking about what works and what doesn't work. I'd love to have you on again at some point, but I want to thank you for your time. Do you have any final parting thoughts before we stop this podcast?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. And again, I guess I would just finish with, for owners that are listening to it, have a discussion with somebody like Greg, and just understand the process, because it's different, and you need to educate yourself. And if you run a successful business, that makes you a bright individual and a curious individual, and this is just one more thing to learn about, and the way you've lined up other people with knowledge in your business, you're going to need some help in this as well. And avail yourself of those opportunities. Find the person that can help you, and it will make it that much easier.
Right. Well, thanks, Jeff. We'll let you know when this is going out, and I look forward to sharing this podcast with everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg.